Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Practical Training Podcast, hosted by Practical Training Professionals out here in beautiful Southern Maryland. Guys, we're so blessed to be able to come back and talk to you guys this week. Really looking forward to tonight's episode. We've got Matt Watson of Tactical Operations Consultant out of Virginia coming on the podcast. He's got decades of knowledge and information, and not just knowledge and information, but he's also been in the game of instructing for a very long time. And he's got it, maybe he won't claim that he's got it all figured out, but this guy he's on target. And we're just happy to have him on the show. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Matt Watson. Matt, how are you, buddy?
Good, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great. I love these late night type shows. It's late for me because I get up super early, but I've had all day to think about it. I've had all day to prepare for this. And in fact, I've had basically all week, minus a little hiccup, right? Like Matt, I was talking to Matt in email and he's like, oh, I'm busy. I got work. I got vacation and all this other stuff. And like out of nowhere, he's like, hey, man, plans fell apart. You want to do the podcast sooner? And I was like, I was in Ocean City training with Ryan. And then we filmed one of these podcasts out there and I got the email. I was like, okay, well, shit, I'll be back on Monday night. Monday night's really not going to work. And then, and Tuesday is, let's just do Wednesday. So here we are. But Matt, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy life to come on and share your wisdom and your insight into the world of firearms and just essentially self-defense with the audience. So Matt, where do we start at here? Let's just give the audience a little bit about yourself and your background.
Sure. So I guess I started down this road way back when in the United States Army as a combat medic, flight medic. And that was kind of my initial introduction into training and teaching others. I was tasked pretty early on in my career to help train other soldiers in basic first aid skill sets and then advanced skill sets as well. From there, got out of the military, got into law enforcement. Apparently something about haircuts and uniforms, like I just could not get away from. Spent a significant portion of my law enforcement career in special weapons and tactics. Was fortunate enough to help start a basic SWAT school for our regional police academy and ran that for a number of years. Still, every once in a while, I get to help out with that program and teach at the academy, so that's nice. And then down the road, I ended up getting a call about a position at Quantico. So I ended up working at Marine Corps Base Quantico for about a year, helping them start their civilian police force. And then from there, I got another call to come to Department of State's Diplomatic Security Service as a senior firearms instructor, and spent some time there. Really got well educated on how to teach others firearms. Up until that point, I thought I had it, being the cool hut SWAT guy and doing all that jazz. But what it really working on the federal side, specifically in state, they really put you through the ringer to be a good instructor. Okay. We talk about military going through a murder board for promotion. I remember interviewing for the position, and that interview involved breaking down 5 random weapons. Most of them I knew, AK-47, M4, but I had never worked with a revolver. So probably one of the most embarrassing moments of my career in firearms was they're like, okay, we need you to take this apart and make it safe. And I was like, I've never touched a revolver in my life. And big mark, on the board there. And then from there, they're like, hey, we're going to give you 10 minutes. You need to train 20 agents to set up a range, run them through a qualification course. We need you to create a whole lesson plan and show us the breakdown of how the range is going to be set up, and back brief us again. Your time starts now. So mad scramble, and that was just to get in the door. From that point, it was just constant evolving. From there, went to special tactics, teaching high threat protection, close quarter battle, and defensive tactics. Then I went to our mobile security deployments, which is small tactical teams that deploy throughout the world. And then from there, I just kind of moved on to other offices and, continue to work in that realm. Throughout it all, I've been fortunate enough to kind of maintain T.O.C., which started as a very basic CCW type class. That was my introduction to starting my own business. And then from there, I just kind of realized, you know what? A lot of other people are doing this, and I just couldn't be competitive, right? A guy's willing to take a group of 30 people to IHOP for an hour, feed them breakfast, and give them a certificate for $25 or $50. I was like, I can't compete on that, and nor would I want to.
Right.
So that's when I started looking at maybe some more. I use the term tactical, but it tends to get a bad rap. I think of it more as dynamic, I guess, training, where you're not flat-footed, flat range, and a stationary target. And that is something that a lot of people don't get exposure to unless they come from a military law enforcement kind of environment.
Sure.
So, and that's kind of what brought me to this point in my career. Here I am 30 years later, a lot more gray, makes a lot more sounds in the joints, and just continue to push through.
So did you so you're out of Virginia now, and then of course Quantico and then the sheriff's department that you worked at and all that's in Virginia. So did you grow up in Virginia and then go straight to the military from that and then arrive back in Virginia, or how did you end up in Virginia?
So I actually grew up in Pennsylvania, in Western Pennsylvania.
Okay.
About an hour outside of Pittsburgh, and had no inclination to join the military. Probably as furthest away from law enforcement as possible without a criminal record.
Right.
And it was one of those cases where I just didn't succeed in college. I like to say I attended for a couple of years, and I certainly had some creative life experiences, but that was just not the route for me. So push comes to shove, a guy I used to hang with had just gotten back from basic training. He had the crew cut, and he was much more fit. He, for whatever reason, would drop down and do push-ups in the club. That was a little annoying, but I had conversations with him, and he's like, "Hey, man, this gave me some purpose," and that's probably my aha moment in life, because I really didn't have any direction or purpose. Other people find it in other ways. For me, it was the military. And then from there, it just kind of set me on a path.
Okay. Well, I got to ask you, are you a Steelers fan?
Come on now. As much as I'm a fan of anything, I've never really been big into sports. I like watching live. Like I'll go to a football game, a high school football game, and cheer my heart out. I get bored as all get out watching it on TV though. So,
hey, that's fine. That's respectable. So I my story a little bit. I was born in Texas and lived there the first few years of my life, but the majority of my life I grew up out in Arizona. So people always look at me kind of squinted eyes when I tell them I'm a Steelers fan. They're like, how the hell did that happen? And, Arizona didn't have a football team for, the longest time. And then, so I was a Steelers fan, and then the Cardinals moved back, and one thing led to another. And now I get, judged for wearing the Steelers hat in Baltimore, in Ravens County, so that is what it is. But, well, first of all, thank you for your service. I think that needs to be said for all veterans. Thank you for what you did there. And especially in the medic field. I served as well, and I've been into some pretty serious rooms with some people with severe PTSD, and a lot of them never really took damage, but they treated damage in that combat lifesaver role or the combat medic role, and that's a different breed of individual, and that's very cool of you to commit a part of your life to that. So honor to you, brother, and continue the fight there. I saw something and you sent me your CV, but you also kind of sent an email with that. And you said that when you were teaching the SWAT stuff and you're in the SWAT game, and then you decided to go out on your own and you were kind of teaching these dynamic drills and peeling back the curtain behind stationary, range instruction to more dynamic drills, that you kind of caught a little bit of shit from your SWAT brothers. Can you tell us about that a little bit?
Sure. So this would have been, early in 2000. And up until that point, yeah, I mean, obviously we had the internet and, YouTubes were, starting out or kind of gaining momentum. But a lot of the things that we did were still, I don't want to say secret, but they weren't openly shared. And there were not a lot of trainers at that point that were going out there and kind of doing more dynamic asymmetrical type shooting, at least in my area. Everyone, for the most part, was still adhering to kind of the NRA structure. Hey, we're going to 50 rounds. We're going to do this. We're going to talk a lot. And then we'll fire a little bit. It's like 20% of the course actually involved live fire. So when I started doing these courses, specifically with the AR, that's the AR platform is really starting to gain a lot of interest in my area. We're finding more and more just Joe and Jane citizen, purchasing these weapons. And at that point, it was like, okay, I've got this. What do I do with it? Right. NRA at that time didn't really have, like they do now, a tactical rifle type course. And so I started, as very basic, hey, this is how it operates. And from there, kind of getting into drills. And some of the guys that I worked with, especially the older guys, really bristled at that idea. They're like, you know what? Joe and Jane citizen don't need to know this. All you're going to do is put us in jeopardy because one of these folks is going to break bad. And now we're going to go up against somebody who's trained. And I admit, for the longest time, I adhered to that same mentality. I was frustrated when I found out in regards to Blackwater. That was really when they were in their heyday in the early 2000s, and they were doing the same kind of rifle courses for anybody, open enrollment.
Right.
And I was like, that's so wrong. That's so wrong. You can't share the super secret knowledge. That was ridiculous. I mean, obviously looking back, it was like, okay, that's just silly. So when I started kind of breaking through that, I was meeting people who, quite honestly, took their firearms training more serious than a lot of the folks that I worked the roads with. These were guys and gals who they had to qualify twice a year, and they touched their weapon twice a year.
Right.
And, and then I had folks who had trained with me over the years. Probably one of the best skill sets I've seen come from guys, electrician, a librarian, an IT person, because they take it serious. And at that point, I kind of realized, you know what, instead of just letting folks go out on their own blindly, maybe they pick up some good skill sets, or maybe they end up doing something really dangerous. We see it all the time, folks sharing these YouTube videos of somebody, out in a field or a backyard somewhere running through a drill that they saw, didn't understand the context of, running around like a crazy person, doing these barrel rolls and SWAT rolls and trying to fire upside down as they roll across the yard. And, and it was muzzle awareness is out the window at that point.
Right.
So anyway, I just felt like, you know what? I enjoy teaching. I enjoy sharing knowledge, and it's not, some kind of closely held secret. I'm not sharing or taking people, like you said, behind the curtain. Instead, I'm going to help you, a responsible gun owner, run that system as safely and effectively as I can teach you.
Sure.
And then at some point, you can always look, maybe there's somebody who's figured out an even better way than what I did. That's so anyway, that for the most part, it's been relatively successful for me. And I think I've seen a real change in mindset with a lot of those folks on the law enforcement side, that they're starting to recognize over the years that, one, they need to step up their game, and two, a responsible gun owner is no threat to them. It's just, this is somebody who's taken it upon themselves to dedicate time, energy, and money to developing a skill. And
That's exactly right.
yeah, and I fully applaud anybody who's willing to, commit to something in that regard.
So you said a lot of stuff there, and I'm going to try to pick a little bit of it apart. Let me go with the big one here. So you're teaching tactical rifle with an AR-15 platform, right? But it kind of stereotypes the rifle a bit. I mean, that is the weapon system that seems to be the most capable for certain situations when it comes to self-defense. But you could teach the same course with any rifle, really. It's just a modification of your pistol drills, right? Different high ready, low ready type stuff, different projections around doorways, and there's a lot of different stuff there. But it can be done with any rifle. AR-15 is just the one that a lot of people use. And I always just try to tell that to people. It's like, you could do tactical rifle with your, 22 Mossberg, little tiny plinker that you got. You could still do it. It's just not going to be as effective in certain situations. And then you said something here about the police. And one of the purposes, as I mentioned here before we hit record here, was one of the purposes of this podcast is to kind of demystify the world of firearms for a lot of people. And I've seen it even in my own family. We do like it's like a homemade turkey shoot thing with the family once a year. And it's like my dad, constantly is like, yeah, this guy's going to do great because he was ex-law enforcement. Like that doesn't mean anything. And that's where, society kind of has this image that the guys that carry guns are good with those guns, and they're just really not. And some of them are, right. I'm not saying that,
Sure.
But in mass, they're not. Or you can't assume that they all are. That's a better way to put that.
Yeah.
If you look at a homeowner, you look at somebody that's investing the time into seeking out training, and they're shooting their firearm, 1,000 or more times a year. Whereas, like you said, or they're shooting 1,000 or more rounds a year. Whereas the deputy that, maybe only touches his gun twice a year to qualify.
And that's, I think, a very surprising, even in my own family. I don't come from a big gun owner hunting family background. My father was never into any of that. And so we've had some, political discussions, which, are about as much fun as any family political discussion can be.
Bet.
And, he had mentioned several times, it's like, oh, well, only law enforcement and this and that, and they're trained and blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, here's the problem that a lot of folks don't realize, is that when you cut a law enforcement agency's budget, one of the first things to go is training. And what might have been a very good training regime is now going to go down to the minimal standard.
Right.
And so what I tell people is, envision, if you will, football fan, right? We're talking about the Steelers. You're a quarterback for a professional football team. You get to practice throwing the football twice a year, and now you're going to go to the Super Bowl. Now, here's the thing. The Super Bowl isn't just a win or lose. The Super Bowl is somebody's going to die and somebody's going to survive based off of your skill set practicing those 2 days out of the year. And they're like, well, that doesn't make sense. And I go, you're exactly right. But when we start talking about all these, kind of political landscapes, what people fail to realize is that if I've got to cut a department budget, right, I can't, cut the number of officers. That's like the last thing that I want to do. Uniforms, well, they got to wear something, so what we end up doing is cutting down on the training that they receive. So we're going to come down to the minimal standard, and not only minimum standard as far as how often, but also scores. In Commonwealth of Virginia, you can pass with 70%. So out of 10 rounds that you fire, 3 might not even hit the target. And that's, so now it starts putting things in perspective.
That's right.
Unless somebody is in a specialized unit, such as a tactical team or some kind of, high risk interdiction or what have you, they're probably not getting the level of training that most citizens feel that every deputy and police officer receive. And that can be, an eye-opening moment for them.
Yeah. And again, it's just, that's part of it. It's the stigma, the cops don't, I mean, that analogy you painted with the Super Bowl and the quarterback, I mean, that makes perfect sense. And, when, and of course, Ryan up here, and what we do up here. And one of the things that we always tell everybody is, you've got your certificate, you can legally purchase a firearm. Okay. You've came through, you've shot your rounds to do the carry permit up in Maryland. But what's next, right? How are you preparing yourself to actually use that tool in the moment of need? And that's where the additional training comes on. And it's just important. It's like any skill, right? It's like a language. If you don't practice it, you're going to lose it. Something interesting, and I want to harken back a little bit to what you were saying about your partners or your community, the SWAT community, when you were participating there. With the training that you're delivering, the kind of dynamic drills, the tactical training, right? What you're doing is you're creating people that are capable of defending themselves, and they don't necessarily need to be defended anymore. And I'm curious if there was, a little bit of ego at work there, where it wasn't just, people weren't just upset with you for, sharing trade secrets, but it's like, hey, they're very possessive of those secrets, and maybe they should be the only ones that know that stuff, because that's what makes them elite. And if everybody knows that stuff, does it diminish their value? Does it diminish their kind of ego, if you will? I wonder if that had something to do with it, as well as, oh shit, Matt's out here teaching the bad guy how to, all of the tools that we're going to use against them. Do you think that, did you ever maybe see any of that, any kind of inflated ego or anything like that in the communities that you ran in?
Well, I think stuff like that is plausible in any community, especially one that's considered elite or special. How do I maintain my specialness?
Yeah.
It's either I get to wear, all black or camouflage, or, I don't have to shave, or whatever it is. Obviously it goes well beyond that, right? It's based off of mission, training, things of that sort. So yeah, I would say, there's always going to be a small percentage of folks who reach those ranks in whatever community, law enforcement, military, and they feel, like in the military, we always call them the badge protectors or the tab protectors, the folks who don't want to let anyone who they feel is below their standard, into that world.
Right.
Yeah, I think for the most part, a lot of that mentality has changed or evolved probably over the past decade. I think it's just a natural progression. We're seeing, those guys, like the guys who trained me came up in the late 80s, early 90s, and to where the whole creation of that kind of special unit, it involved creating a persona as well. Right. In the law enforcement community, we joke about, stereotypes, that all the undercover narcs always have beards and goatees, and they wear like the Affliction t-shirts, and they all let their hair grow long. Right. And they all dip. Like that's a narc.
Yeah.
Detectives, suits, the whole nine. And the SWAT guys are typically always walking around with either crew cuts and Oakleys and, kind of this touch me, I kill you attitude. It's a joke, but there's always a little sliver of truth in any of those kind of caricatures. But like I said, I think over the past decade or maybe even more, there's been an evolving in mindset when it comes to law enforcement, specifically training. I see a lot more folks on the law enforcement side who aren't in special units, saving their money and seeking out additional training.
Okay.
I'll get a lot of folks coming through our courses, oftentimes repeating the same course several times over a couple of years, because they appreciate, one, this is something beyond or in addition to the training they've already received, right? And they're always looking to better themselves.
Yep.
And two, I think they started to recognize that these courses aren't a bunch of, yahoos and hillbillies running around just wanting to blow stuff up or, do goofy stuff. Instead, even though they might be shooting next to a person who isn't in the law enforcement career, that person's as dedicated and as focused on the skill set as anyone else out there. And so it kind of goes back and forth between, I need to improve myself as a law enforcement officer, specifically in this realm, lethal force. But then I also am recognizing that these citizens are as dedicated to this skill building as I am. And so like I said, I think it's evolving beyond maybe just the personal or the ego.
Okay. You mentioned evolution there, and actually I had a question I written down here that I wanted to ask you. So you've kind of experienced and witnessed this evolution in the mindset in the law enforcement community, but you don't only instruct law enforcement, you instruct everyday civilians also. Can you talk to, I guess, the quality of the student from when you started to where you are today? Some people, with the advent of technology, one thing that we've seen, and this is just for example here, on a long range day, if you're understaffed and maybe you can't run everybody through the drill at the same time, you see a lot of people pulling their phones out and just kind of pulling themselves out of the moment. So sometimes that's a bad thing. Sometimes I guess that's a good thing, depending on what they're doing on their phone or whatever. But I know I got buddies that run ranges that, fortunately they're in canyons and there's no service there anyway. So it kind of eliminates that threat, right? But that's one evolution, right, with the advent of technology that some people have seen. But what can you speak to, like, the character or the quality of the students that you're instructing now from when you started to where you are today?
That's a really all-encompassing question.
It's a big one.
Yeah. So I think early on, one, where we weren't encountering kind of the fear of losing, firearms rights, and we weren't dealing with limitations on ammunition. It was practically every walk of life was, coming to courses.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them with some trepidation. We would get husbands and wives or boyfriend, girlfriend, friends who one person was very focused, like, hey, I really want to get good at this. And the other person was kind of being pulled along, dragging their heels because of change in political climate. I think I'm just seeing more and more folks who are like 100% focused right from the get-go. Like I don't have to win them over.
Okay.
They're here and they're like, make me better, make me good at this. I want to be able to perform this skill set under duress, under stress. So the mindset initially is already kind of like there in motion.
Okay.
Whereas early on, you were getting folks who were like, I've been interested. I'm just going to try it, see what I think. Like, they were just putting their toe in the water. And then by the end of the day, they're 100% in. And it's like, hey, what do I need to buy so I can be better, as far as deploying the weapon system? Because we know, throwing magazines in jean pockets is doable, but not preferable, if it could kind of booger up my initial learning process. Like I want the equipment to be a non-issue for me when I first start learning. And then as we get good at the skill, well, then we can pare down the equipment.
Right.
So anyway, that would probably be the major change that I've seen, is that what started out when I was doing this so many years back is that it was probably 50-50. 50% of the folks were like 100% in on this, and the other 50 were kind of like, I just want to try it. And now we're getting folks who they're brand new gun owners, but they're 100, or not 100%, but they're very much committed to developing a skill set. And if we have breaks and they're on their phone, they're more often videoing or taking pictures of someone else doing the drill. And they told me after the fact, it was like, well, he or she runs the drill really well. I want to see what they're doing. And so when I go home, I can watch it and then help improve myself. So they're certainly now taking much more ownership, I think, of their own development.
Yeah. And I was talking to somebody the other day and asked him a similar question, and his response was similar to yours. And it kind of pairs both kind of conversations together there, right? So technology is also a good thing in this instance because, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, there wasn't YouTube. And to get trained, you had to know a guy or seek out training. And nowadays there's so many, and although there are bad apples in the bunch, there's so much content on YouTube and other avenues where people can do, basic pistol stuff in their home with dry firing and different stuff like that. So, with technology, with improved weapon systems, with better availability to different tools, the people that are really interested can be really interested and learn a lot before they come to training. Right. And so when they're there, they're dedicated to be there because they've made a conscious effort to improve themselves. Whereas maybe in the old days, of course, I wasn't instructing back then, but from what I hear from, guys who've been in the industry like you, it's like you mentioned, half the people wanted to be there. Maybe the other half would have enjoyed some YouTube first, right? To kind of break down the stigma and the danger of a firearm and all that other stuff and become better prepared for the tool. So yeah, technology does win. I mean, a lot of times technology is there for a reason. And if it's used the right way and it's practiced and then reinforced on the range with qualified instructors, right? That's where you can maximize that tool set. So yep, that's a good point. And, that's an interesting perspective. And just in general, I mean, when I started asking this question to people, and I don't want to show my cards here, but when I started asking this question to people, because I see it in my trade, I'm an engineer by day, and what you see is just these kids that come up, they're kind of entitled and they're just like, I don't want to do the work, and their attention span is so short, and if it's not instant gratification, they move on to the next thing. And, when I start talking to kind of the gray hairs in the room, or the smart people in the room, I like to call them, it's like, in this community, in the engineering community, you've seen a decline in quality. Right now, the information is there, the knowledge is there, but the quality is shrunk a bit because just the instant gratification isn't there. You have to work for something. So I anticipated that kind of answer when I started asking this question to range guys like yourself. And it's like, wow, shit. Every person I've asked that question to now has said basically the same thing. Quality is improved, right? The character of the people seems to be improving. That's inspiring. That's good news. I like to hear that. You've said a couple different terms. You've identified yourself a couple different ways in this conversation. And I've been pretty deliberate not to say the same word more than once here, but it's because I have a question I want to ask you. What is your definition, if you will, or what do you think the difference is between an instructor and a teacher? And how would you classify yourself?
You know what? That's an interesting question. Not one that I've really, I guess, differentiated the two terms. I always visualize that a teacher is traditionally, a classroom instructor. K through 12, professors at higher ed, that's to me is a teacher. An instructor tends to be more on the military type side with hard skills, right? I'm instructing you on how to perform a task, how to develop a skill set. But what I find is that I try and incorporate both aspects. One of the biggest challenges I had as a trainer, instructor, teacher, whatever, let's say conveyor of knowledge.
Sure.
Whatever challenge I had conveying knowledge, the biggest challenge came about when I was with the teaching with the State Department, and we would get every week, 100 some students, and many of them did not want to go through the training. They were there under duress. They were going to go somewhere overseas, and if it was mandated that they attend the training.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've got folks who are all college educated, some freshly out of university, others, 50s, 60s years of age. Up until that point in my career, I was only training people who wanted to learn, right? Whatever I was teaching, they wanted to learn it.
Right.
Even on the military side, teaching combat lifesaver, these guys might start it out like, oh, I don't really want to do this. Blood's scary. But once we started rolling with this, they were like, this is badass stuff. I want to learn it. In that environment, I had folks who 60-year-old men acting like petulant kids, and I'm trying to teach them, hey, you're going over into an environment where just the way you look makes you a target. Not a word comes out of your mouth, but the way you look is enough to make you a target. You probably should have some skills to get away, to see it coming, whatever. So what I ended up having to do is relate in such a way that I kind of pulled these people into my world.
Mm-hmm.
One of the challenges some of my peers had is they came right out of the military. And so it was all knife hands and F-bombs, and this is what you do, roll on, no questions asked. And it was a challenge because, teaching soldiers, Marines, there was no back talk. It was just, roger that, 2 bags full, and away we go. So what I ended up finding myself having to do is get better conveying that knowledge in such a way that I'm not ostracizing anyone. I would get complaints because, give you a case in point, a critique was written that the instructor looked too aggressive and too straight. And I was like, I don't know what to do with that. I really, if the roles were reversed or the terms were the opposite end of the spectrum, that would be a lawsuit.
Could be, yep.
My point is that what I ended up doing is spending a lot more time. My wife is, 20 some years now, educator, K through 12. And so I had to kind of go back to school and talk to her and go, how can I convey this knowledge in such a way that I'm going to reach a broader audience, right? One of the things happens when you kind of have the same type of students over and over again is you end up drinking your own Kool-Aid and kind of like buying into your own hype. And that can be just a downward spiral, like, oh, how great am I? This is awesome. I'm so cool.
Sure. Until
you get those students who are like, I don't think this is worth my time. I don't think you are adding value to my life. And so being faced with those challenges, I had to really kind of dig deep and get humble and realize, you know what? I'm not the greatest thing since pockets on jeans. I need to come at this from a different perspective. And that probably is what kind of brought me to this point in my life, as far as creating as much of a hybrid as possible between, the instructor and the hard skills, and then the teacher who's actually out there conveying knowledge, engaging with the students. I mean, I don't want to separate, but you forced me to separate the two.
No, because there's a difference, right? And words matter, Matt. And
Yeah.
no, I think you're right. The instruction, and again, in some of my line of work and in my past experience, right, instruction is very formal. You're instructing somebody on a hard task, right? Oftentimes, an instruction may or may not have a certificate on the end of it, right? It's just, I'm instructing you on how to do your job, right? Turn this wrench, put this key in here, and then hit start. Done, right? No emotion involved in it. Whereas a teacher or even an educator, and those two kind of go hand in hand. There's a level of care that's applied to the subject matter, right? I want you to be able to receive this information in a way that's going to be usable. If not, I could have given all this to you on YouTube or on PowerPoint, right? It wouldn't matter. And that's, I think that, through your thought process there of kind of explaining your story, right? I think that you kind of helped redefine or define for yourself the difference between those two things. Teacher is compassion. It's love. I want to help you. I want you to understand this information. I want you to be prepared in this situation. I want you to be prepared for a threat, right? Because I don't want to see you die. I want you to go home to your kids, right? Whereas instructor is like, you're going to learn this, like it or not, and then you're going to take it. And what happens after you have that knowledge, I don't care. I've done my job. And that's where, and tying this back into your line of work and what we're bringing out here on the podcast is, there's a difference out there in the firearms community where you've got the people that are just there to instruct on the task and they don't really give a shit. But then there's a whole group of people, and it's one of the reasons I want to bring you on the show, because I'm familiar with you and the guys that I run with are familiar with you. You break it down by the numbers and you want to help people get to where they're at. And something interesting that you do to make people kind of care a little bit, and I don't know if you're still doing this or not, but if somebody shoots off target or somebody blows, they're not paying attention or something, you make them get physical on the range, right? And why is that? Why would you care enough to make sure someone's paying attention to where you would make them do push-ups on the spot, right? Can you explain that? Like, what's your philosophy behind forcing physical, physical training on somebody at a gun range? What do you got there?
So, well, let me caveat that, because I've apparently have turned away some potential students over the years because they see the videos. One, it's obviously based off of your physical ability. I recently had a gentleman, amazing human being, in his 70s, fought in Vietnam, actually fought at Hamburger Hill. And he was coming through, did our TAC pistol and TAC rifle, and just killed it. I mean, I hope to be him when I grow up. But I recognize everyone has their physical abilities and limitations. So I'm not dropping the class for push-ups or anything of that sort. Now, coming back, why? Every round that we fire, we're 100% accountable for, in a defensive situation. At the range, it's one thing, right? They're all going into the dirt. They're going to a known location that's been deemed safe. If, heaven forbid, you're forced to utilize lethal force, every round you fire ends up somewhere. Yep. And you're 100% accountable for that. And I think that's where some people miss the mark, to use the analogy. And what I do is, all right, I'm not going to scream at you, because I certainly don't want you to shut down from learning, right? Because we're cultivating learners, cultivating skills. But I'm going to tell you, all right, prior to this drill, if you outrun your headlights, if you go faster than you're capable of, and you throw around, it's going to be 5 push-ups, or maybe somebody doesn't have that physical ability. It's some other type of exercise, because I want you to immediately develop those neural pathways to where if I'm not focused on what I'm doing and that round goes off somewhere in the real world, it ends up in a house, a car, a person. That's bad. Mm-hmm. We need to immediately, as we're developing these skills, recognize that this is a life and death skill set and that we have to be responsible. So that's the reasoning behind it. Now, we have fun with it.
Sure.
And it is, for the most part, everybody kind of enjoys maybe not doing the push-ups, but they appreciate that there's an immediate penalty, if you will. Hey,
there's a consequence.
Exactly. And for every action, right, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And in this case, we want to already develop in the new shooters, I've got to be 100% in on this. And if I throw around and it ends up at a bad place, it's a much greater penalty than me just doing some push-ups or some jumping jacks or running in place for 30 seconds.
That's right.
You know, there's more to it. But at least on the training side, we're not pushing anybody to physically shut down, right? You know, that's not the goal. It's more, I made a mistake. I'm going to pay for it here. I'm going to learn from it, and then I'm going to do better the next time. Because that's all I ask of my students is, you're only competing against yourself, and do better the next time. Mm-hmm. Each time you come up, do better than the last.
Yeah, it's that, and you mentioned it. It's that kind of neural connection there between, you know, I forgot inadvertent discharge or a wild round or something like that. Boop, there's a consequence to that. I'm going to remember that next time I come out, right? Oftentimes you will, and you learn that crap in the military, right? But you know, it's true. It works, right? That's a good point. I wanted to ask you, I mean, we've talked a lot about you as a person and kind of your a little bit of philosophy here about the way that you train the way you do and the why behind it. What are your, and this is kind of like a PTP kind of signature question here I'm about to ask you. In a nutshell, what are your kind of 3 fundamentals that you want all of your students, new, you know, firearms owners, responsible firearms owners to have after they leave your course? So if you could just like, and just kind of don these people ready to carry their firearms out into the real world, what 3 fundamentals would they have?
Wow. You really need to like preload these questions.
Man,
so
I want them on the fly, man.
So now I'm gonna and my way through this.
Let me tell you some of mine, right? So obviously know the 4 big rules about firearms, right? You know, always treat a gun as if it's loaded, never point it at something you don't intend to kill, right? Keep your finger off the trigger, you know your backdrop, that kind of stuff, right? That's paramount. You know, understanding that is one of those fundamentals that everybody, I think, needs to have to be a responsible gun owner. And hopefully I didn't steal one of yours, but that's one of mine. But that's kind of what I'm talking about here. You know, It's not, you know, identifying a threat or this or that or whatever, whatever it may be for you. Like, you know, Matt sends somebody out on the street. It's like, you know what? I hope that guy has these 3 things. But, you know, what do you think those would be?
So my initial thought was kind of right in line with yours. Safety is always that first priority. I hate seeing these stories, you know, this negligent discharge and somebody assumed the gun was unloaded or just was not careful with how they stored it, whatever. I mean, those are horrific incidents that are totally avoidable. So safety is going to be the first. The second, especially with concealed carry permit holders, is that everywhere you go, a gun is in play. You brought it. So what I stress specifically, we do something called concealed carry survival class. I used to teach Krav Maga at a local martial arts academy. And so a lot of the concealed carry survival class is split between unarmed, you know, conflict resolution and then rolling into armed. And so what I would stress or hope people take away from this on the second part is that there's a certain responsibility, right? You know, I'm carrying a gun. My personal opinion, and it's just your Uncle Matt's personal opinion, is that I'm not a fan of open carry. I think there are certain circumstances and jobs or positions that it makes sense. But for me to go to Walmart, I don't even know if you can go to Walmart open carry here in Virginia anymore, but I'm not a big fan of that because, you know, right away, everyone draws that attention. And quite honestly, I want to portray that gray man ideal, you know, that I'm no different than anybody else. I just go about my business. So anyway, the second thing is recognizing that any fight you get into has a gun in it because you brought it.
Okay.
And we can't be overconfident in our abilities. One of the things I tend to see in some folks is that I have a gun, so now magically I'm going to win whatever altercation I am in. When there's unfortunately a whole category of lethal force encounters where the victim killed with their own firearm because they introduced it and they went up against somebody who quite honestly was more skilled or just bigger and badder, and took it from them. So that would be the second thing, is kind of keeping in my frontal lobe here. I've got a gun on me. I need to make those smart decisions based off of that, right? I don't want to introduce myself into a situation with this overconfidence. Instead, I should be even less confident and only go to that as that last resort. And then the third thing is recognizing the weight. The idea that if you're going to carry a gun, you have to recognize you've made the conscious decision that if it's life or death, you're willing to pull the trigger. It's one thing as a soldier in combat, or as a police officer defending the life of someone else, like that's drilled into you throughout the academy, drilled into you throughout basic training. You're doing this for your brother and sister to your left and to your right, right? So by the time you come out, you've already consciously made that decision, right? If push comes to shove, I am going to eliminate the bad person before they eliminate me or someone else I care about. Oftentimes, as a concealed carry permit holder, I just think, well, I wanted the gun for protection. Okay. Do you recognize that doesn't just stop by owning the gun? If you're going to do this, are you in the right headspace, the mindset, the right kind of belief system that I'm capable, or at least willing, because we never know if we're capable until that moment, right?
That's right.
But at least start consciously going through that and go, I am willing to do this as that final option, that last resort. Or maybe they recognize, you know what, I'm not. And this probably should not be the path that I pursue. So
those are powerful, brother. I like that. I'm glad. You know what? You said you weren't prepared, man, but you hit them. Those are very good lessons that I would, ideally, I see exactly where you're coming from. And that's some of the stuff that I've never really tried to portray to anybody that I've assisted in instructing. That brevity of the moment, that brevity, the responsibility that somebody has to carry with them if they were to, exercise their use of force. That's big. And I think that maybe that's something I don't hear trained enough into people. So, that's a good one. That's a really good one, Matt. I like that. So safety, responsibility, and recognizing the weight of your decision to pull the trigger. Those are big. Yeah, it kind of got me thinking about my own decisions to carry at times, right? And we advocate for it. We advocate for people to, be able to defend themselves, but there is definitely that component. It's like, defend yourself, but are you ready for the consequence? You're ready for, the sleepless nights or whatever it is of, taking somebody else's life, man. That's big. It's powerful. Let me pivot. Go ahead.
No, I started kind of addressing a little bit. One of the things that really was an enlightening moment for me is a student of mine. He had taken several different classes. He was the reason why I kind of came up with this concealed carry survival, and then got me thinking about the what ifs, right? I've been fortunate enough in my life to receive a lot of hard skills training. And, I try and maintain my fitness level even in my advanced age. You can, no, don't deny it, Mike. I am old, but thank you for saying that. But, you know, he was a smaller gentleman, you know, thinner. I would say he was probably 5'8" and maybe 105 pounds, right? Younger guy, you know, but he was proficient with his weapon systems. He's like, Matt, my big fear is that an altercation happens and this person takes the gun from me. What do I do? Because all you've shown me is when I have the gun out, what I can do. But we've totally skipped that in between, right? You know, there's different scenarios. Obviously, the worst being an ambush. You don't see it, boom, it's happening, and now you're in the fight. Then there's, you know, kind of the puffing of chest. I always, when I was in the military, I worked at several, well, one in particular, country bar outside of Fort Hood, Texas. And it's the 2 a.m. cock walk where you see the guys and there's only a couple women left in the bar. And next thing you know, the shoulders are back, the chests are out, you know, and the strut happens. You can see that a mile away and go, all right, I'm going to avoid that dude. I'm just going to call it a night, go home, and avoid the fight altogether.
Right.
So he was concerned about that in between, or even that worst case, that ambush. Somebody jumps on top of him because he was a photographer, videographer by trade. So he's carrying a lot of high-end stuff that I'm sure is worth money, you know, in the pawn shops and whatever. So that started me kind of thinking through, you know, and realizing just learning how to run a gun is only part of the equation, right? We use the term gunfight. So we've got the gun aspect. We tend to forget the fight aspect, you know, and are there ways for me to avoid it, right? Being aware of my surroundings and picking up, you know, what we call pre-assault indicators or clues, avoiding those potentials, you know, creating distance, getting away from the problem, de-escalation, all that stuff. So that's kind of what started me thinking about further on down the path, right? We talk about and address before the fight and what leads up to it and in the fight. And then he got me thinking about what about afterwards? Like I had to use this firearm. I had to end a life and the consequences associated with that. But that's what kind of brought me to that point.
Yeah, that's heavy. So of all the classes that you teach, and there's a bunch, but of all the classes that you teach, which one would you think is, would you say, and I know you've got students that are probably listening like, what, you know, how does that make sense? But which one do you think is your favorite class to teach?
I would go between the Tactical Carbine 1 and then the Vehicle Ambush Tactics class, but for different reasons. The Tac Carbine 1, I always enjoy creating these aha moments for folks, and that's usually where we get, hey, I heard the president or whoever is going to take this, make this illegal, so I'm going to buy this rifle, but I never thought about owning a rifle before, and somebody recommended you. And so I've got the brand new shooter.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoy working with those folks because this is something totally new, and I've got to help them first and foremost overcome the fear. And I tell them, I'm terrified of chainsaws, right? I've run them with limited skills.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen horrific accidents involved with them. They're loud, they're scary, don't want any part of them. But it's a tool, right? It's a tool designed for a specific purpose. I use that as an analogy because the AR or whatever rifle system, because we've had folks run Mini 14s, AK-47s, you know, carbine, pistol caliber carbines, a whole gamut. But it was new to them. And so we just talk through and kind of get them comfortable with it, recognizing it is a tool and it is dangerous like any other tool if used improperly. And then from there is building that skill set. And that's seeing those aha moments where like, oh, okay, now you said this and now I'm doing it and I'm finding out, I'm making that connection. To me, as an instructor, as a trainer, I love that. Like that energizes me, is seeing students have those aha moments. Now, on the other end of the coin, the vehicle ambush tactics, a lot of that is kind of the same, right? I'll have folks who have taken other types of pistol courses, some dynamic movements, maybe even some room clearing, but operating in and around a vehicle, there's similarities, but there are also some drastic differences. One of the things we'll do is actually shoot parts of the car with different caliber of weapon. And I always pull the class, do you think it'll stop it? Right? The A pillar being an example. Pistol caliber, yeah, it'll stop it. Get the AR and 5.56 and just shoot like ball ammunition. And it stops the ball ammunition. It stops the AR round. And they're like, holy cow. And I go, now we start looking at other aspects. We start operating in around the vehicle. And it's something that unfortunately has become very appropriate, that kind of training, because we're seeing, these, road rage incidents, where, people are doing crazy things, whatever the cause, right? The level of stress that they're under, they've snapped and bad things are happening. And most of us, myself, prior to COVID, I'd spend easy 3 hours a day commuting. And a lot of my students will come from like the Northern Virginia DMV area, and they're the same boat, right? They spend, days. If you look at, every month, they're spending days in their vehicle, and they're carrying in the vehicle, except maybe those who have to work in DC proper. And they're like, I never thought, right? I just figured I could get out of the car and run, or somebody was going to attack me from walking from work to the car, or the car to the mall, or whatever. Instead, they're recognizing, okay, I might have to operate in this environment.
Sure.
So, again, we get to see some real good aha moments there. And, people start to, I think, re-examine an environment that they spend so much time in. It's like seeing your house for the first time. Now you're in your car and you're like, okay, how's my seatbelt lay across, my holster?
Yep.
Do I have, my shirt, my jacket outside the seatbelt so I could access it? And how would I do this? And, they start what ifing. And I always like when people take ownership of their own learning, right? I'm there to convey what knowledge I have and to start you down that path, right? I'm not the end all be all by any stretch of the imagination. I might have some outstanding hair, and a certain kind of, Roman godlike profile. But beyond that, it's about, getting this knowledge and sharing it with people and starting them down a path. And hopefully they continue on that path. And so I've cheated the question by saying 2 classes.
Oh, it's fine. The essence here really is you're trying to collect those aha moments, right? And you're seeing those the most in your TAC carbine 1 class, and then your vehicle ambush class. So it's okay to have 2 favorites. I have 3 favorite children. So, I understand the game. It just depends on where you're at that day. But I am looking forward to attending. I'm actually coming to the vehicle ambush class in November here in Maryland with PTP-Gun. And then you've got 2 more classes coming up. I think they're in January, the active threat response and the home defense course. I haven't taken a home defense course yet, so I will certainly be at that one. Because I think, I've done some house clearing and some urban combat environment stuff. And like, I feel comfortable in my home, and I know that I have the advantage because I'm more familiar with the house. Mm-hmm. But, as a lifelong learner, right, I don't think that I could ever have too much information. So I will certainly be at that one. So those classes, guys, if you're interested in learning from Matt. Again, since he lives so close and since he is such a good instructor, we try to get him over here as often as possible to PTP. So there is a vehicle ambush class coming up. I think that's already damn near sold out, man. A lot of people are interested in that. And then we have the active threat response course and the home defense course coming up in January. So if you're familiar with that, you just jump on PTP-Gun and you can find those classes there. And then Matt, what do you have coming up in Virginia that you'd like people to come out and check out?
So speaking of TAC Carbine 1, August 14th, I've got that.
Is there any heads left open? I mean, can you get people in still?
Yeah, that one we have 4 spots still available.
Okay.
In the TAC Carbine 1. September 12th, we've got the active threat prevention. That's what we call our active shooter. So what I end up doing in the class is there's some classroom portion where because one of the things that I've done over the years is presentations on active shooter response for different businesses, religious houses of worship, that sort of thing. And we talk through kind of the different scenarios the average person could engage, in this at work, at home, shopping centers, probably the 3 big. And then talking through some commonalities, having plans. That's something that a lot of folks might take upon themselves, right? You mentioned your family, my family, oh, that's great. We have, this great training, and bad things happen. They go sideways and boom, we're on it like Jason Bourne, where the rest of the family is kind of like hands in the air and that giant question mark floating over their head because we never took the time to brief them on, hey, maybe you should do this, that, and the other. And so we talk through that. It's like, if you are going out with family members, it's not just you've got to think about what to do with them. And so a lot of that is almost like when I would train folks who were doing protection, how do I get the VIP from point A to point B? And kind of using a lot of those same analogies. And then we take case studies, incidents that have happened throughout the world and break those down. The active threat course, we also include a Stop the Bleed, which is, like a trauma tourniquet, because again, it's great, having those gun skills, but we're probably going to save more lives with first aid training than, with whatever firearms training that we're provided. So we go through that. October 16th is TAC Carbine 2. That just builds obviously off of 1. It also incorporates more transition drills. TAC Carbine 1's focus is just that, on the rifle, whereas 2 is a combined pistol and rifle. So there'll be situations where gun goes down, transitioning, and that's not something a lot of folks get to practice on a flat range, right? There are limitations. Some ranges won't even allow you to draw and fire, let alone transition from a rifle to a pistol. And then November 6th is our last class in this area, and that's low light pistol.
Okay.
And again, we have classroom portion. We talk about low light theories. We break down, flashlight usage. A lot of folks are unsure as far as what's the brightness of a flashlight. Like there's lumens, there's candela. What does this mean? What does that mean? We break all that down. So now if folks decide they're going to go purchase flashlights, they're more educated on what that means. We go through different techniques, as well as making them aware that utilization of a flashlight can almost make you as much of a target as it is illuminating the potential threat. So right. we go over that as well. But and then we roll into the later in November, 13th and 14th there with PTP-Gun doing the vehicle class. That should be a really good weekend. And
I'm hoping.
Yeah. So as long as the weather holds out.
Yeah.
So it should be good. I'm looking forward to it.
Yep, you got yourself a busy next couple months, man, and we're looking forward to it too. And I encourage anybody listening to this to do a little, obviously support your local range and your local instructors. But if you get an opportunity to come out to the Mid Atlantic and want to learn from one of the best in this region, I encourage you to seek out Tactical Operations Consulting (T.O.C). Find Matt Watson. All of his contact information for you guys that are listening audio only. Will be down in the show notes. And then, of course, on the YouTube, you guys will have everything there as well. If you're interested if you're in the Maryland region and you want to attend any of these vehicle ambush courses or the active threat prevention or active threat response, and home defense stuff, stay tuned because that stuff will be coming in January. Matt, there were so many more questions I want to get to tonight, but I know we're kind of getting into the hours here. So I'm just going to end it here, man. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your information. I hope that if anybody's out there again and you're in the region, seek them out. Matt, thanks again, brother.
All right. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. And hopefully I didn't drop your listenership.
Well, you can't go much further than 0, brother. So we all right. All right, guys, with that, we're out.